Former Chicago Bears head coach Matt Nagy admitted to a lot of mistakes during his time running this organization, and it sounds like he's learned a lot. So could he be a head coaching candidate again in the future?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. The only thing more exciting than the big game is the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. It's only a few days left until the Super Bowl. Are you ready? The Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Learn more at nissanusa.com. On the show today, we hear from former Chicago Bears head coach Matt Nagy at the Super Bowl and how he reflects on his time with the Chicago Bears. He gives us the impression that maybe they thought they'd have more time and that they were thinking longer term with Justin Fields than just what we saw in the 2021 season there. We'll also learn about some of the lessons he learned along the way, things he might go about differently, and then how that shaped what he's doing now as the Chiefs quarterbacks coach and how that might shape his quest to maybe someday be a head coach once again for another franchise. Nagy was talking as part of the Super Bowl media days down in Arizona, and I'm not down in Arizona this week, so I'm not going to have the actual video and audio from you because I wasn't there to get it, and I don't want to just take someone else's video and audio, another outlet that recorded it themselves and went through the trouble of being down there. Even giving them credit, I just don't want to just use their hard work multimedia capture here. But I do think some of the quotes are interesting here about just not only the organizational belief behind Justin, but the way that they talk about this really, I think, illuminates some of maybe why they went about things, some of the ways that they did, and maybe the firing at the end of the season ended up maybe a little surprising to Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. Not by the time they got to week 17, I don't think they were surprised that they got fired after that, but I don't think they expected or were prepared for only having one season with Justin Fields, that they were planning this out a little bit longer in advance than that. A couple of quotes from Matt Nagy I want to read for you here. Ryan Pace, myself, and everybody in our organization, we were all in on drafting Justin, and we were all committed to him, and we had a plan. And obviously it didn't work out for us. But we also had a plan on how to develop him and how to see him grow and, to work to his strengths. It's hard to do that right away in months and summers and 1 year. In fairness to every quarterback that's in this league, it's hard to do what you think they're going to be in 1 year. It's hard. I don't care what anybody says. These guys need time to develop, and there's plenty of instances across this league of that being true. Separate quote that follows this, just to differentiate that these are part of separate answers, but on the same topic. He said, quote, "These guys are so young. When they're thrown into it, everybody thinks it could just happen overnight, that they're going to play like they did in college. That's not real. When you're a coach and you go through your offense, your scheme, your players, you want to do everything you possibly can to make sure they succeed." And I think the way Matt Nagy talks there about how we had a plan on how to develop him and how to see him grow and to work to his strengths and how it's hard to do that in 1 year and right away. I don't think they truly envisioned, that they had to do whatever they could to save their jobs, at least not right away, right? They didn't go into 2021 thinking we have to do whatever we can with Justin to save our jobs. Maybe once they're in season and, the bleep hits the fan, maybe then it becomes save our jobs mode. But the whole idea of Justin sitting on the bench throughout the offseason, Justin not getting first team reps through OTAs, training camp, and the preseason, something that we looked at as a criticism of this quarterback plan that Pace and Nagy claim to have. You can see where if you're Pace and Nagy, and maybe it's not a smart assumption, but maybe if they're operating under the assumption of like, yeah, we're going to be here for at least a couple of years and can play the long game with Justin here, then maybe the plan really is, sit him for the whole season and sit him for as much of the season as possible, and that he doesn't need those first team reps all offseason to get ready, and that his development can be much more of the slow game and not like, hey, let's develop him as fast as possible to get him on the field by week 1 or as soon as possible. Then Andy Dalton gets hurt, and you have a decision to make there, and that's kind of the inflection point here, where maybe they started feeling the pressure a bit more or whatever it might be as to, going to Justin Fields in that moment, as opposed to having Nick Foles still around as that third string quarterback and not just going to Nick and continuing to then keep Justin Fields on the bench. You wonder if there was organizational pressure there to see what the young quarterback could do, if there was pressure to feel like, oh man, we're starting to lose games and I can feel we're losing a grip on whether it's the locker room or the trust or the faith of the organization, the ownership, that you have to put Justin out there to, again, like does the priority change during the season from long-term development of Justin Fields to, oh crap, short-term, we need to save our jobs at this point? And is that how he ends up getting out there? And instead of then you get neither plan fulfilled, because you give up on your long-term development plan, but then you also didn't have the right plan in place to be able to play Justin Fields, and he gets thrown out there. And, Nagy, of course, couching it a little bit with understanding that, yeah, a lot of rookie quarterbacks struggle early in their careers. And he's right that as much as we've seen a couple of guys in recent years have really strong starts quickly, that hasn't really been the norm. They do need time to develop, but also the Bears definitely did not put Justin Fields in the best position for success and for that development to be prioritized early on. He should have been more involved in the offseason so that when they get to week 3 or whatever it was that he got thrown in there, it's a little bit less, thrown in the deep end into the fire, et cetera, to put him in a very difficult position. That's really, I think, one of the main points that Nagy looks at as being an inflection for him and a mistake in exactly how they handled that process. We'll kind of hear his quotes about really specifically that Cleveland Browns game where Justin Fields was sacked a bunch, and also some of the other things that they probably would have done differently. Was he able to go back in time and change some of those things? Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Ultimate Pro Football GM. We've been talking about this mobile app a lot, and I can't tell you how much fun we've had competing against our fellow Locked On NFL hosts. We had a league that we were all playing in, and Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers was our Locked On NFL champion. A little tough for me trying to get my quarterback situation figured out, but that's what I get for choosing the Bears in that game. But it's your turn to compete now. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, this game is for you, because you get control over every strategic aspect of your team. You play through the seasons and you lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty, all in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want, whenever you want to. Locked On Bears listeners get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you use our promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On, all caps, to make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. After 2018, maybe you felt like the Bears were onto something, not a dynasty, but onto some bigger and better success with Matt Nagy. We know it didn't play out, and a lot of the focus, now that he reflects back on it, is obviously on 2021, because everyone wants to talk about Justin Fields. I wished there could have been more conversation about what went wrong with Mitch Trubisky and kind of look back on some of those things and the lessons that maybe carry over in some way, shape, or form. But regardless, it was a lot about Mitch Trubisky, and specifically, the start there. And it was the first game against the Cleveland Browns. He gets sacked a bunch, and it really felt like it set the tone for the rest of the season for Fields. Of course, he had some good games and some great moments in there, but you kind of knew that things were never going to be quite ideal for him in that scenario. And I guess they weren't quite ideal for him all of this season either, but there were moments as well. But here's the quote from Matt Nagy about the start of Justin Fields and how they handled that. He said, quote, "You go back to the Cleveland Browns game, it was a really, really difficult game. I think there were 8 or 9 sacks, and it's not what we wanted for him, for Justin. We didn't want it for us. We didn't want it for Justin. That's the last thing you want, is to hurt somebody's confidence, a young quarterback, like we did that game. Nobody wants that for anyone. And so we needed to learn from that and be able to change some things and how we handled them, but you end up running out of time." And that's an interesting way there, that you end up running out of time. And you run out of time, what that makes me think about is that they didn't start early enough in changing things and being ready for Justin. It's also interesting, too, that he basically admits that game hurt Justin Fields' confidence. That's not something that I think has been explicitly stated in this process either. But as far as changing some things and how we handle them, right? They needed to adapt this Chicago Bears offense more to Justin Fields, to not try and make him be Andy Dalton in this offense, but to do more of what we saw Luke Getsy and company try to do this season. And, to their credit, I mean, they did win a couple of games right away with Fields in there, but it didn't particularly last for a lot of that stretch either. And so it felt like they were so slow to adjust that they ran out of time, because it felt like the adjusting and the, trying to learn from that and change some things and handle it differently that he talked about, it felt like it didn't start until that Cleveland game. And if you're not starting that until week 3, you don't have time to just completely overhaul your offense or completely change new things. I mean, you have to practice some of those things and slowly implement them through weeks and weeks of practice. You can only change so much so quickly if you hadn't been already working those in and preparing more of that in the buildup to that point. And so good on Matt Nagy for recognizing it. I mean, it should have been more obvious and shouldn't be a problem, but it does show a guy who's learning from some of his mistakes in this process, and that's an important thing. Coaches do grow in the same way that players develop through their careers, but also this idea that it hurt Justin's confidence. I don't know that we directly saw that in a lot of ways, right? I don't know that looked like a guy whose confidence was certainly not shattered. I don't think he's implying that it was shattered there, but certainly it took a hit in that way, in that Browns game. I mean, he still was able to come back and beat the Lions the next week, beat the Raiders the week after that, but he wasn't playing particularly well. And I really do think it was a bit of a wake-up call for Justin, not only in terms of holy crap, my offensive line is bad and I need to do differently in the NFL because this level of play in the NFL is something else. I mean, yeah, he got in at the end of the Bengals game and threw an interception and stuff, but when you're in a whole game and you're getting sacked 9 times, it really sort of cements a lot of that process for him. But it also felt like maybe some of the first major in-game adversity in that way that Justin, I don't want to say had ever experienced, but had experienced in a long time with all the success he had at Ohio State. He had adversity in terms of transferring from Georgia and not getting the job and losing competitions and stuff. But I mean, when he stepped into football games, it always seemed to go well for him up to that point. And, you can count the end of that Bengals game, sure, but this is every game he has started, right? This is you're taking over now. It's go time, Justin. And he's 6 of 20 for 68 yards and he's sacked 9 times. That may have been one of the worst individual games of Justin Fields' career. And I think it started this process of him having to adjust his expectations a little bit and adjust and get to know losing and have to live with that. Because I mean, we know about how much Justin Fields hates losing, and it's not about accepting it and being okay with it, but it is about stomaching it and having to feel that, because it's just not something he had to feel a ton, certainly not in the butt kicking kind of way that the Bears received it, right? He had lost football games before, but Ohio State was always in every game, and you felt like entering every game, they were the favorites or at least had a decent chance to win every game. And in that stretch with the Bears, there were a lot of those games when you really didn't feel like the Bears had much of a chance to win some of those games. I mean, he didn't win any more games after those first 2 wins. I mean, he lost his final, 7 starts of the season from that point. Played really well in a lot of those games, but I don't know that we properly assessed and estimated or understood the type of impact that moment had on Justin Fields. And not that it, derailed his whole development, but it is an interesting admission from Matt Nagy that's part of this process that illustrates how much more and how much better they could have done. All of it has been certainly a learning opportunity for Nagy, and now that he's back in Kansas City, he's back at the quarterback coach's job. He now has all of this under his belt, and he's really looking at it, I think, from a different perspective. So we'll kind of look at how this has changed Nagy, how he looks back on what he's learned, and how that sets him up as maybe another future head coaching candidate sometime down the line. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the better way to do daily fantasy sports, especially for the big game coming up this weekend. You can have some stakes in this one with players that you care about that aren't from your Chicago Bears. You can pick with PrizePicks, you're in complete control because it's just you versus the projections available. You're not competing against other people's lineups, and you're not, whether you win or lose isn't shaped by what other people decide for their teams. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. It's super easy to play. Literally takes 60 seconds or less. Just download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Just don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up for an instant deposit match up to $100. The Locked On Bears podcast is also powered by Built Bars, the world's best tasting protein bars ever. I eat one literally every single day. I've got a couple of boxes in my pantry right now, and it's always a sweet treat with no guilt. I'm trying to eat a little bit healthier this year, and Built Bars are a great part of that because they satisfy my sweet tooth while still being good for me. Every Built Bar is soft, easy to chew, covered in 100% real chocolate. They taste like candy bars. But Built Bars also have only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. It's the perfect balance of candy bar and protein bar without all that crap sugar and fat that you just don't need that makes you feel like trash anyway. We've been talking about Built Bars for a long time here, and now you don't have to wait around to get a box. Now you can get your Built Bars not only online at Built.com, which is usually how I end up getting it. It's a great way to have them constantly at my doorstep whenever I need them. But in a pinch, I know that I can run to my local Walmart or Sam's Club to get them in person. That's right. If you head to your nearest Walmart today, check out the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. I've got cookies and cream in my pantry right now. Or if you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. I also have brownie batter puffs in my pantry right now. I cannot recommend them highly enough. Go to your Sam's Club or Walmart, try them for yourselves. Trust me, you'll thank me later. I don't want to say that Matt Nagy is going to be a head coach. And I'm not even here to garner sympathy for him. Right? I'm not trying to make the argument like, oh, we should feel bad for Matt Nagy. He got a raw deal in Chicago and he learned so much, so we should really give him a second chance. But I do think it's interesting to hear about the growth of coaches because so often we think of them as often sort of like stagnant fixtures. It's like that, when a guy has coached in a couple places before and his team has been good or bad, you're going to get that exact same guy the next time you hire him or the next team that hires him. And we discount, especially I think younger coaches, how much they grow and change in the same way that players grow and change. And they learn from their mistakes in the same way that players do, and they develop, and they're not coached on coaching per se, but as they go through their careers, they talk to other coaches, they're exposed to other ideas, and they learn different things as well. And so I think if Matt Nagy were to get another head coaching job someday, which has a lot of steps in between now and there, I do think he would be a different coach. That's not to say he would be a significantly better coach, but let's not forget 2018, 12-4 and a playoff berth. And then he did make the playoffs a second time, even though they were pretty much garbage at that time. But like, let's not act like he's the worst head coach in Chicago Bears history. Like this is not a defend Matt Nagy podcast today. I want to make that clear. I just want to contextualize this properly. Like as far as like fired head coaches go, we've seen worse head coaches get second opportunities. And that's why I don't rule it out as a possibility for Matt Nagy. Here's what he said from Super Bowl media days about some of the things that he looks back on. He said, quote, "Well, there are a few things, and I know some decisions that in those 4 years, there are some decisions that I went through communication-wise. I think that's the biggest thing. One of my greatest strengths, in my opinion, was relationships, open communication, and open honesty with players. And never at any point was I not that, but there were points where I could have been better. And I thought I was good at it, and I wasn't. So for me, I know personal experiences, without getting into detail of how I handled certain situations, that I know I can be better at." I think for him, it's about communicating more and communicating more clearly, that he feels like he did a good job of creating communication channels, that making people feel like they can communicate. But there's the next step of like actually communicate, saying the things you need to say in the ways that you need to say it, and communicating with people in the right ways that I feel like he talks about being maybe not good enough at. I wonder if some of that happened with Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, Justin Fields, the communication through that process, maybe the communication with Mitch Trubisky and when they brought in Nick Foles. Like you wonder over the years there where there were communication breakdowns, I guess might be the way to say it. I don't know if breakdowns is the right word, but communication issues or shortcomings in his regard. Because it seems like he and Ryan Pace didn't really have that, but it would seem like whether it's between coaches with him and Bill Lazor and that whole situation or where the communication breakdowns were, he didn't say, but I think there's certainly some room for improvement in that regard. And he also talked about, and I don't have the quotes exactly on this, about how, when he was an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach before coming to the Bears, he's in all the Chiefs meetings thinking quarterback coaching, how does this make you better quarterback coach or offensive coordinator? Like what do I do with this as offensive coordinator? And he says now, when he's in those same meetings as Chiefs quarterbacks coach, that he looks at them from a head coach perspective again. It's like, well, how is the head coach handling this? And obviously it's still doing the things he needs to do for his job, but he's able to think about it from the experiences he's had in Chicago. And to have all that under his belt, I think makes him and will make him a better coach in the future at whatever opportunity, whether that's the quarterback's coach now, or if he becomes an offensive coordinator again, or maybe someday he gets head coaching interviews again as well. Because Matt Nagy obviously takes a step back from head coach to quarterback's coach, stayed in the coaching world, but had to, is paying his dues again, having to drop back down. He's still only 44 years old, so he's not an old coach by any means. That used to be a really young coach, I think, back in the day. He was reported, I don't know if there was an interview that was actually reported, but there was reporting that perhaps he was a candidate for the Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator position this year, like not like this offseason right now. The Tennessee Titans just yesterday or the day before hired an offensive coordinator, and so therefore Nagy will not get that job. I wonder if had he not been in the Super Bowl this week and had the Chiefs lost a week or 2 or 3 ago, if he might be an offensive coordinator right now, but teams didn't necessarily want to wait and then see if he's going to take the job or if he's not and whether he'd get rejected or not, or whether he would turn them down, right? But you're already seeing teams show offensive coordinator interest in him. Obviously, working with Patrick Mahomes will be a good way to rebuild his image a little bit as a guy who does know a lot about quarterbacking and a guy who does know a lot about offense, even though that didn't translate in Chicago. There's a difference between knowing a lot about it and being able to take that knowledge and apply it. But I think there's no denying Matt Nagy knows a lot about quarterbacking and about offense. The question is, again, applying it. But if he goes from Chiefs quarterbacks coach to offensive coordinator of another team next year, like if Mike Kafka leaves the New York Giants and takes over as the Cardinals head coach, as some are speculating, could Kafka came from that Andy Reid tree. Could he become Kafka's OC in Arizona? Could he replace Mike Kafka with the New York Giants under Brian Daboll to kind of keep some of that same Chiefs offensive influence continuous there, right? And all of a sudden, if he's the OC with Kyler Murray for a couple of years, or the OC with Brian Daboll and I guess Daniel Jones for a couple of years, right? Not that those are both easy paths to another head coaching job, but you can kind of see maybe how you start to get back into the realm of possibility. I know a lot of Bears fans would say, no way, never, and certainly not for Chicago would he come back as a Bears head coach. But I'll keep an eye on Matt Nagy. I don't know. I'm not trying to generate sympathy for him, but he doesn't seem like a bad human being. He seems like a good guy who just wasn't a good head coach. And, maybe he's one of those guys who's just always going to be a better coordinator or position coach than head coach. But this franchise will always be inexplicably tied to him. Not inexplicably, intrinsically, for inevitably, like long-term, permanently be, not inexplicably. I don't know what word I'm looking for there, but will be permanently tied to him. He's a part of this. And the Bears might not have Justin Fields if not for Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace going all in on him. Maybe to try and save their jobs, but regardless of why, they went all in on him, and that's why the Bears have Justin Fields. So there's a little something there that will always be tied to this organization. And so we'll keep tabs on kind of what his career is. And certainly it might hurt if he becomes a head coach somewhere else and has a lot more success than he did here. And you'll look and say, well, why couldn't he do that here? So it's always just going to be something that we're tied to. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about Matt Nagy. It's only because all this was rehashed at the Senior Bowl media days, and he opened up about it in a way that we haven't really gotten to hear from him since he got fired. I promised that we were going to get to cap casualties on a podcast this week. We were going to do that today. The Nagy thing came out, so I'm going to bump that at least another day here, but I'm ready to talk about other teams' salary cap casualties, players that they're going to cut that could be good additions for the Bears with all the cap space that they have to add to this free agent pool. We'll go through some of that presumably on tomorrow's podcast, unless something more important like this pops up that we weren't particularly anticipating. Like we might get Justin Fields Super Bowl quotes coming in the next day or two that might have something revelatory. So that might take precedent, but soon we will talk cap casualties. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel or wherever you're listening to the podcast. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL for coverage from all the biggest stories around the NFL. A lot of Super Bowl coverage. We've got some guys down at the Super Bowl this week to get some great audio, video with some players, coaches, former players, executives, etc. Also, any other coaching changes and hires that we hear around the league. And of course, getting you ready for the big game as well. So check out Locked On NFL for more football coverage. Coming back tomorrow for Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.